43rd meet of our Alumni Association. Am I audible? Radha Madam, am I audible?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Today we feel honored that Sri Clooney from Harvard University is with us to talk on the first Tiruvantati of Poigayalvar. The Pasuram starts with Tamar Ugandadi Yavurum Avurum Dane. He is not new to us. Many times he has visited India and we have heard him talking on Vaishnava subject, Ramanuja, Pillavacharya, and Vedanta Desika. In fact, his knowledge on our Sampradaya is very deep, even though he is a Jewist. Now, he earned his PhD about him. He earned his PhD in South Asia languages and civilization in the University of Chicago and was the director of Center for the Study of World Religion at Harvard. He is a leading figure globally in the developing comparative theology and he authored numerous articles like Thinking Ritually, Retrieving the Purva Vimasa of Jaimini, Theology After Vedanta, an experiment in comparative theology, Hiding Place in Darkness, a Hindu Catholic theopoetics of divine absence. This is almost a narration of Nammalvar's Paragalanagi experience. And recently he has translated Nitya Grantham of Ramanuja and is about the day-to-day Anushtanam, how a Vaishnava can do. And I again played a role of the proverbial squirrel of Ramayana. I took him to Vaigundavasi Sri Uve Manarudi Swamigal, my guru and guide. And he blessed us and he was very much appreciative of Clooney's approach to our Acharya's writings. He is currently working on the works of first four Alvars, Poigai, Bhudam, Peyalvar, and Tirumase Alvar. Now I request Professor Clooney to commence his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. TK, and thank you all for being present for this lecture. It is a cold winter morning here in Boston. Temperature is about 15 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's well below 0 centigrade. So it's a cold morning, snow on the ground. So I'm sorry I'm not there with you in Chennai. It would be nicer, I think. So nice to see familiar faces on the screen, and I'm appreciative of your listening to me. I know that so many of you are so learned and know this material so deeply that I appreciate your willingness to listen to me when I speak. So I have a presentation I'll put up on the screen, and I'll simply go through it slide by slide, and then we can talk about it. And if anyone would like the PDF that I'm showing, you can also ask for it afterwards, and I can give it to Dr. TK, and then he can share it with everyone. So here, let me put it up on the screen. So here we are. This is where we are today. And I begin by a number of points. I hope it's big enough for everyone to see. Is that okay?
Looks okay.
It's okay.
Okay. Okay. So, God pleasing his people, reading a verse by Poigai Alvar with commentaries. And my goal in this is to show, not so much to you, but also to people in the West, the value of study, slow and careful reading, which is always valuable. So that's the first of my presuppositions. Secondly, that reading religious poetry is an intense, fruitful, and creative practice. Some people today I find are more interested in the politics, the economics, the social issues, and they don't slow down to read. So my point is to show that the reading is valuable. Reading religious poetry with commentaries is especially valuable because of the content of the commentaries, the Vyakyanam, and because the commentators show us how to read well, carefully, and intelligently. So I should say that one of the reasons that attracted me to Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya in the beginning was the fact that there was the Bhagavad Vishayam on Tiruvaimuri, and that one could read not only the original pasurams, but also read the commentators, ancient commentators, modern commentators, more and more, which is a wonderful teaching technique. And I think that also I'm dedicated to. We can study within our own tradition, but also outside it. Reading outside too is valuable, learning from scriptures, sacred poetries, and commentators too, even in other religious traditions other than our own. This reading outside teaches us to return with a fresh eye to our own tradition. So those are some general principles we can talk about later if you would like to. In this presentation, I will show all of this with reference to a single example, Poigai Alvar's Mutal Tiruvantati 44. So here is the verse from the Alvar. Dr. TK has already read the Tamil to us, but I'll try it myself just to show you how poor my Tamil is. Tamar uhundada, yavuravam avuravam dane. Tamar uhundada, yaper matra per tamar uhunda. Yavanam chintita, imayada irupare, avanam aryanam. Whichever form pleases his people, that is his form. Whichever name pleases his people, that is his name. Whichever way pleases his people, who think upon that unceasingly, that is his way, he who holds the discus. So it's a simple verse, but very beautiful because it is so open and so welcoming to different forms and names and ways that I found it attractive in the beginning. And I found it in an unusual way. I encountered it in a little book by Dr. K.R. Govindaraja Mudaliar from the 1940s, when he has a chapter on each Alvar, and on his chapter on Andal, he quotes this verse, even though it's by Poigai Alvar, he quotes it in the book. So this is a book you probably all have on your shelves, volume 1, Mutal Putam, and a very interesting book. And I needed something for class 40 years ago when I was teaching. So I translated his chapter on Andal and brought it into my course with my students back in 1985. And this is the page on the right-hand side where this verse is quoted. And we can talk about the translation issues later. But when I saw this verse, at first I didn't know what Mutal Tiruvantati meant. And I didn't know that it was not a verse by Andal herself. But nonetheless, I found it very beautiful. So I translated it. This is my translation uncorrected from 1985. And I translate everything that the author gives as part of the story. And so this paragraph was very interesting. So when Andal has been called to Sri Rangam, and she's going to have darshan, but also to unite with the Lord, this is what it says. One doe-like woman among Bhattanathar's attendants said to her friend, "Dear friend, in his Ramavatara, our Lord married the daughter of Mittala's king. As Kannan, he married Rukmini and so forth. But it does not seem right that now, in his Archa form, Ranganatha should choose to marry Goda." And when the friend heard this, she said, "Doe-like friend, Periyar says this, the great one, says this about the Lord," and gives the verse then, and then draws a conclusion. "Therefore, you should have no doubt as to whether the pure Lord of Sri Rangam is gracious to Goda. If the Lord graciously appeared to Prahlada out of one of the carved figures in the golden temple, I think the golden pillar actually, not fort, is it extraordinary that he should be gracious to Goda out of an archa form constructed as his form? See, friends, many men and women come from many cities to rejoice in seeing the marriage of Goda." So the verse is quoted here as making sense that in fact the Lord in Sri Rangam will be a bridegroom for Andal, even though the friends are doubting how could that possibly happen in our time. Nonetheless, this verse is used as a kind of proof because the form, the name, the nature that are pleasing to Andal, the Lord will be that way. So I had the verse in that form, and only later, years later, Dr. TK mentioned that I've been translating the first Alvars, including, of course, first of all, Poigai Alvar. And I began to read the verse, which is number 44 here, in the context of the verses around it. And I won't read them all, but I realized quickly that reading one verse really should be read in the context, particularly in an andadi, where the verses are linked to one another in a certain way. So taking the first one, 42, that I put up here, if you combine Tiru and the earth goddess and the cowherd lady, don't they add up simply to Tiru? That's his view, this one, color of the dark sea, as he lies on the hooded snake, on the milk ocean lapping round Tiru. Defects of mind and hard deeds keep their distance. All becomes wealth falling right into their hands. If they offer flowers and waters at his feet, he who wears fresh tulsi that grows in Punam fields, if they keep on worshiping him, they are his people. And so on. So what I learned in recent years, not in 1985, was that reading 44, which is very beautiful, is even better if you read it in terms of those that come before it, and then I won't read them, but the ones that come after it. So reading in context all 100 verses of Poigai Alvar gives more meaning to any single verse. So I began to learn that in recent years, and obvious again to you. But then I went on to realize, as I said, that I enjoy reading and learning from commentaries. All the ancient commentaries, beginning with Periyavachan Pillai, and Appillai, who is a commentator on Periyavachan Pillai. So I was interested in their interpretation. What did they think this verse meant? And reading it with them as guides and teachers, since I've only, as you know, had not so much time in Mylapore studying with teachers when I was reading Tiruvaimori, only a year. And that really I would need much more time to do this properly. But having the printed books, Krishnasamy Iyengar reprinted so many of the texts in a valuable way. Reading Periyavachan Pillai, Appillai, Krishnasamy Iyengar's own gloss on what they were saying in his notes at the bottom of each page, very valuable. And then the great commentators of the 20th century, and I'm sure some of you knew these gentlemen personally, Uttamur Veera Raghavacharya and P.B. Anangaracharya. But these are the great commentators of the 20th century who I find extremely valuable, and I try to read them when I can, even though their teaching is very deep and often very complicated. For this presentation, I'm not dealing with Anangaracharya, no offense against his teaching, but I'm sticking with Uttamur, finding that his teaching was enough for this presentation. So I learned from their pada urai, their word-by-word glosses, because again, it's so helpful to see how they break up a verse and then explain each word to an audience, but then learning from their understanding of what the verses mean, each by itself and in wider and wider contexts. So all of that is valuable to me. It's, again, maybe obvious to you, but I learned this and I try to communicate it to my students as well. So having the verse in place, again, our simple verse, whichever form pleases his people, that is his form, and so on, I began to read it with commentary. And Periyavachan Pillai, in his introduction to verse 44, he says this: when noble ones who are his own people, as in the verse, then there is no need to pose obstacles to them. For one can say that his Swarupa lies in dependence on those depending on his Swarupa. And this in itself is a very beautiful point, even apart from the verse, that the Swarupa of the Lord has a certain paratantra relationship, dependent relationship with those who depend on him. So not simply one-way dependence, but both Swarupas are in dependence on one another. So he says that's what this verse is showing us. Pillai, in commenting on Periyavachan Pillai, adds this: thus far, that is to say, according to the previous verses, those taking refuge do service. They are doing Arimai service at the feet of the Lord. But here the Lord has forms and names which gladden them. And so his service lies in conforming himself to devotees by means of Archavatara. And so this again is a very beautiful point, that and as serving the Lord, becoming the Lord's people, is then reciprocated by the Lord serving his devotees. by coming in a simple Archavatara form and being present to them. Krishnaswami Iyengar, in his comment on the preceding comments, in the previous verse, verse 43, if they keep on worshiping him, they are his people. But after they see him, they worship. If one asks, how can there be seeing there, like quite where they are, not simply in general, but actually in their place, right there? When those at his feet think to offer service in some way, he conforms himself to them, having forms and names that gladden them. Again, he serves in this world by Archavatara. So I think, again, it's stressing the value of Archavatara, the darshan in the temple, the availability of the Lord, who actually comes to particular places, particular times, showing himself to people as they need to see him. So that I found very beautiful, and that is their perspective. Reading Uttamur and his introduction to Mutal Tiruvantati 44, above in the preceding verses has been explained worshiping and thinking upon the Lord. In whichever form one focuses on the Lord, whose forms are para, vyuha, bhivava, harda, and archa, let them think upon and worship that form. So as you pray, as you meditate, as you have devotion, focus on that form. Let them take as the form whatever way is pleasing to their mind and heart, even apart from well-known forms. There is no obstacle to saying this is his form, since one cannot say that the Lord of all cannot take on various forms, even if they're unique to one or another of the devotees. And so in his forms as Rama, Krishna, and various avatars or bhivavas, his are 4 arms or 2 arms. He has ways of being as Pattabhiraman, as Kaliya Mardanan. He takes on so many beautiful, lovely forms. In Archa, his are many forms that please the mind. And this echoes a verse I'll quote later. His form can be fashioned with many substances, gold, silver, copper, stone, clay, and so on. Cannot one worship the one who holds the discus, thought of in this way or that way? So you can see his teaching is unsurprisingly quite in keeping with Perivachan Pillai and Appillai, the idea that the Lord will come in the form that his devotees want and has always come and now is available as devotees seek him. And the verse shows this. There are various itihasas or anecdotes, as I translated, shown in the commentaries, and as you know, and Perivachan Pillai, in glossing the word forms in the first line, tells the anecdote of Ramanuja walking around in Sri Rangam and seeing the boys drawing some image of the Murti in the dust on the road. And they're kind of, I suppose, acting as if they were the temple priests, honoring the image and so on. So he sees them putting the image there, and he realizes that for them, at that moment, that image in the dust is no disrespect, but is the form of the Lord, and therefore the Lord is there for them in that way. And so he falls prostrate and worships the image as he would do in the inner sanctum. So he takes literally the idea that if the Lord comes to the boys that way, then I should honor it as well. In a similar anecdote, the boys draw in the dust an image of Ranganatha and Nanchimar, and Ramanuja again takes dust as prasadam. So he takes some of the dust in his hand as the prasadam because this is a holy place. And here Perivachan Pillai quotes from the Yuddha Kanda, 117, where Rama is reminded of his true identity by the gods. I had been thinking my form to be merely a human form, that of Rama, son of Dasharatha. As you know, when he's thinking of the Agni Pariksha, having Sita step into the fire and so on, he's forgotten who he is and who she is. And the point seems to be, as he says, the Lord admits that he is entirely caught up in his accessible presence for humans. So Rama is so devoted to the avatar that he forgets that he is not simply Rama, but is Lord Narayana, Lord Vishnu, and has to be reminded by the gods. That kind of full immersion in the image and the form is what is typical of the Lord, represented by verse 44. Another example, he takes the word names in the second line, whichever name pleases his devotees, that is his name. So Vishnu Chitan learned that Ayodeva is the name of the Lord that pleased Nanjir. and therefore started calling the Lord by that name, particularly when the Lord appeared to him and said, "My name is Ayardeva." So too the Lord is Satangai Alahir, which I translate as beautiful Lord with ankle bells or bracelets, bells, I guess, which becomes a name preferred by the Lord over all other names. And so he appeared to Vishnu Chitan actually wearing ankle bells, because the name is a name that pleases his devotee, and therefore he shows himself in that form, not saying, well, that's not my name, or I don't have ankle bells, but he shows himself in that way. So these stories become very important as illustrating the truth of verse 44. Similarly, Uttamur, when he is glossing the words of the verse 44, he too elaborates on the names and says, in his Vibhava form, his names are such as Rama, Krishna, Gopala. In the Archavatara, his are Sanskrit names such as Srinivasa, Varada, Ranganatha, and auspicious Tamil names such as Nambi, Arav, Amudha. For example, Nanjir, taking the same story, gave the name Ayurdeva to his domestic Archa in his own home. The Lord as Ayurdeva appeared in a dream to Yengalavan, Alvan, and said, I want Navar Palam, which I read somewhere means blueberries. You can correct that later, because if it's not blueberries. And he asked the Lord, who are you? And he said, I am Nanjir's son, or Nanjir's child. And later, addressing Nanjir, Yengalalvan says, your Pillai, your child, has decided to settle down with us. And he comes in the name of Ayurdeva. In that way, the Alvar and the story is asserting the heart of the matter, that the Lord will come now in our time and place, just as in past ages, in a form that is pleasing to a Nanjir in his home, in his dream, and so to anyone who hears the story that is being told. Also, the commentators, as you know, start quoting verses that are extremely like Mutal Tiruvantati 44. And for me, this is interesting, not having an encyclopedic knowledge of the commentaries, to see that verses are connected to one another. So something in the Tamil, something in the Sanskrit, all of this in the very learned mind of the commentator begin to come together. So Periyavachan Pillai illustrates the verse by quoting Bhagavad Gita 4:11. As these take refuge with me, in just that way do I love them. Everywhere, Partha, humans follow my path. You might say, however they take refuge with me, in just that way do I love them. And so basically using the authority of the Bhagavad Gita to say, as the Alvar is saying in Mutal Tiruvantati, so too Lord Krishna in the Gita says, however they take refuge with me, in that way do I love them. And this again is part of the story, that these texts go together. In explication of the anecdote about how Ramanuja worshipped the image in the dust, Periyavachan Pillai also quotes Vishnu Dharmottara Purana. Out of gold and silver, he makes a very lovely image of Vishnu with gracious eyes and productive of his delight, delighting the maker of the image. Superimposing on this image Brahman, let Brahman become such in his mind that the ultimate reality of Brahman is now seen in this form of Vishnu that he has created in gold and silver and so on. Let him worship it, let him offer obeisance, let him sacrifice to it, let him meditate on it. In that way, he removes impurities and attains that form of Brahman. Now, this, I suppose, Vishnu Dharmottara Purana text could be a long discussion in itself, because you have this ultimate reality Brahman made accessible in this form of Vishnu made a murti, gold, silver, some other substance, and that worshiping it, one attains Brahman in that form. So the ultimate reality is not only for those who do very serious, deep, private meditation, but even in Archa form, you can reach Brahman in that form as Vishnu with gracious eyes and productive of delight by that image. So that's very beautiful. Commenting on Periyavachan Pillai, Pillai summarizes the meaning of the citation that I just quoted. Thus the Lord does not consider his own greatness, but holds as his own forms, the names, deeds, etc., those which please people who take refuge in him. Thus, Poigai Alvar reflects on and makes known the excellence of the nature of the image form with which the Lord serves those who take refuge in him. So it's confirming the same point, but showing that what is said in the Purana or the Gita fits very nicely with the words of the Alvar. Uttamor, at the same place, quotes from the Jitante Stotra, the form that does not belong to you, nor the figure, nor the weapons, nor the foundation, but rather the figure of the person, the Purushakara, belongs to your devotees, and thus you shine forth. So it's a little bit unusual to say that the Rupa of the Lord and the Akara, the weapons, the Mulam, and so on, are not the private property of the Lord, but rather all of these really belong to the devotees who get to decide, Lord, I will tell you what your Rupa is. I will tell you what your Akara is, which weapons you hold, how you stand, and so on. And the Jitante Stotra is taken to really illustrate the same point. Krishnasamy Iyengar here quotes very importantly from Tiruvaimori 369. He himself is our surety, our mother and father, yet not just those. Foremost in the clan of flawless immortals, first among or within the three. People of the world, don't be worried. Don't ask, is this one that one? The one you ponder in your heart is indeed the deep sea-colored Lord. And this is very beautiful. We can always talk about translation issues, but very beautiful because now you have Namalvar in his Tiruvaimori echoing what is said by Poigai Alvar in his text. So the Lord is with us like a mother and father. He is always present in the first of the Trimurti. Don't worry about the image that you have if it's not only, is this really the Lord? Because what you ponder in your heart, that is the Lord. Don't despair, don't lose hope about your meditation. It always comes true because the Lord comes as you wish. Well, in the fourth line of Tiruvaimori 369, namely the last line, the one you ponder in your heart is indeed the deep sea-colored Lord, then that becomes the case for citations. And so in the Bhagavad Vishayam, you have explications of that line. For example, Nampillai in the Iru quotes here Mutal Tiruvantati 44, and also quotes Gita 411, and Vishnu Dhammota Purana 103:16. So they not only are seeing a connection, but the same verses from that we've been talking about are now useful in explaining a verse of Namalvar as well. And so a reader is told, if you read Mutal Tiruvantati 44, also read and study with commentary Tiruvaimori 369. And you can go back and forth between the two with the same Gita verse, the same Puranic verse. But there, he also adds the Sri Rangaraja Stavam verse. Let us cease counting your births overflowing with auspicious qualities. Cease counting them because they're beyond counting. Let us cease numbering the groups of your qualities because they're beyond number, O Lord at Sri Rangam. You delight in being worshipped in this world in temples, homes, and hermitages, bearing all things in a condition of complete dependence on your temple priests. Tender-hearted persons are stunned at this character of yours. So this, again, is a very beautiful text, that the Lord has so many qualities of graciousness, so many kinds of qualities. The Lord is worshipped in different ways in temples, homes, ashrams, and so on, and is completely dependent on those who do the worship, such as the temple priests. Tender-hearted people should be amazed and not take for granted that the Lord is so easily adapted to people. And so I think it's, again, the confirming, but it also has the value of forcing us to read other places as well. So not simply to read Mutal Tiruvantati 44, but read in the Sanskrit, read in other parts of the Divya Prabandham, and make all these connections. Similarly, in his Gita commentary at 411, the verse we quoted already, Krishnasamy Iyengar links 411 with Mutal Tiruvantati 44 and with Tiruvaimari 369. So this again may be obvious by this point, but when Krishnasamy Iyengar does his beautiful commentary on the Gita, he uses the same quotes. So now they always go together, Gita 411, Mutal Tiruvantati 44, and Tiruvaimari 369. They kind of are lights shining on one another. He also adds the quote from Jitante Stotra 1.5, reinforcing the same theme of accessibility. But then he adds two more, which is very beautiful. I will, from the Vishnu Purana, I will see the face of Vishnu with the lotus eyes, which once seen even by the imagination, removes the sins of humans. So seeing the face of the Lord in a way that is some kalpana, and by the imagination of you, by the way you construct it, that is effective in removing sins. And likewise, Vishnu Purana 5.7.67, having withdrawn from sense objects, yogis imagine the Lord's form in their hearts, and in meditation, they worship it. And so not to criticize this or say, well, that's just your imagination, but as the yogis imagine the Lord's form in their hearts, so too worshiping it is the right thing to do. So the circle of quotations and parallel passages continues to grow. I add one more. This one I won't be able to go through in any great detail, but Manavala Mamunigal, in his Tattva Traya Vyakyanam on Pillai Lokacharya's text, he there at 200 cites both Mutal Tiruvantati 44 and the passage I just quoted, Sri Rangam Rajastavam 274. And he says this, Archavatara is the state of its presence in the temples and in houses possessing all the functions which are under the control of devotees, overlooking the shortcomings of those devotees. The Lord resides without restrictions regarding place, time, and fitness of the person who worships. So again, you would all know this from the temples, but also from your own homes where you are now, perhaps, that the little arch avatar images that you have in the house, you can put them here, you can put them there, you can pray this way, you can pray that way. But the Lord overlooks any shortcomings and says, well, that is the way I will be. So he makes that point. Unlike the specific forms of Vibhava or avatar, he is present in the material of the choice of conscious beings when it says, whatever form is pleasing to them, that form he assumes. That is to say, according to the words of Poigai Alvar, whichever form pleases his people, that is his form. So he's making the same point with Pillai Lokacharya's work, using the same Mutal Tiruvantati text. As the Lord takes that form for himself, which devotees imagine as his divine body, he makes himself present in any material the devotees choose, such as gold, silver, or stone. And I won't read this, but here he quotes the same passages, the Sri Rangaraja Stavam again, several passages of it, showing that again, all these passages are connected, confirming that the way you worship is the way the Lord will be present. So one could go on with this. There are passages I found in Vedanta Deshika also using Mutal Tiruvantati 44. One could keep going if one wished. But I'll just come toward a conclusion with one new point. So to recap, Mutal Tiruvantati 44 is widely taken as disclosing the general truth of God's adaptability, condescension, echoed in other verses of Tamil and Sanskrit texts. In a sense, all these verses are making the same point in different ways in two languages. Mutal Tiruvantati becomes a node, like a meeting point in a web of connections, just like Gita 4.11 and Tiruvaimari 3.6.9. The three belong together. So I think one could, if you wished, take the three verses, of course, in the original Tamil and the original Sanskrit, and meditate on them together. It's like having three lights or three deepas instead of one. You have three together, all of them reinforcing one another, each one reflected in brighter light because of the other two. And I think that is itself could be a kind of meditation to take the three of them together. But this is just an example. You probably can think, as I've been talking of other examples, where other verses from Poigai Alvar or any of the Alvars will show the value of a very focused manner of reading and learning, in part due to the web of learning displayed as citations are added from Sanskrit as well as Tamil sources. And again, I would be personally lost without the commentators from Perivachan Pillai to Uttamur and so on, if they were not pointing out the parallels and the connections. But they show, again, if you read one text closely, you can then read 100 texts closely. And the ability to learn from going back and forth becomes very beautiful. And so back to my example. So I started with the Govindaraja Mudaliar hagiography story of Andal. And I'd like to push it one step further to draw a conclusion to this essay. So again, back to the book, this is where I started 40 years ago, reading the verse from the Alvar. And I hope you can see from what I've done that when I started, I didn't even know that the verse was from Poigai Alvar because it was quoted regarding Andal. But then reading it now, 40 years later, seeing there are so many different ways of thinking about it that are really much more brilliant, and showing that this is why the woman is quoted in the text as I translated it 40 years ago, as saying that 44 is a verse that really justifies the improbable idea that Andal, Goda, can go in procession to Sri Rangam and then have this union with the Lord in the inner sanctum. So telling in the 1940s, for a popular audience, I presume, people about the value of Archavatara in Sri Rangam or anywhere else, using the same verse that 1,000 years before was being used in a similar way. And I know so much more about it. But what I did further, and this will be my last part, is pushing it further. I had occasion to use it differently. There was a book that came out maybe 10, 15 years ago now called Many Mansions. That refers to a gospel verse. Jesus says, "In my house, my Father's house, there are many mansions." Multiple religious belonging and Christian identity. How is it can you love God in different ways and still be part of the same faith? And I use this verse as the example in my essay, which I can send you the essay if you want to see it. I only give the first page here. God for Us is my title. Multiple religious identities as a human and divine prospect. And my point in the essay was to take, for a Christian audience and a Roman Catholic audience, to take Poigai Alvar, Mutal Tiruvantati 44, and show them that in another tradition, Sri Vaishnava tradition, a point is made about finding God as you find God, and then God being present to you in the way you find God. So instead of God only comes in one form and no other form, God can come to you as you expect, as you find. And I use this essay, maybe 20 pages long, to do much of what I did in this essay, showing the quotations and so on. And I talk about at the bottom of the page about 1984, 85, and how I translated the text and so on. But I come back here to the final slide, where I look at my own Catholic tradition differently because of my study of the Alvar. So as I said at the very beginning on the first page, we can, after we study a tradition other than our own, then we can come back to our own tradition in a different way. So myself as a Roman Catholic, when I read and study Poigai Alvar with the Gita, with Tiruvai Mori, with all the other texts, this changes the way I come to my own tradition. And the example is this. So I am a Jesuit in the Society of Jesus. Our founder, St. Ignatius Loyola, wrote a little book, a manual of meditation called Spiritual Exercises. And it's basically 30 days of meditation in which you find God and find the will of God for you. And what he tries to say in that is you meditate on what God has done, you meditate on Jesus, you meditate on the Gospels, and then you find God in your life. And there's a guide, usually you make the exercises with a teacher who teaches you, but he also in this quotation tells the teacher not to interfere. So while a person is engaged in the spiritual exercises, it is more suitable and much better that the Creator and Lord in person communicate himself to the devout soul in quest of the divine will, that he inflame it with his love and praise and dispose it for the way in which it could better serve God in the future. So the expectation here is that when somebody is praying, as it says, God will communicate to that devout soul who's seeking God's will, inflaming it with his love and praise so that it can better do arimai, service in the future. As the person meditates, so God will come to the person in that form. Therefore, the director, the teacher of the exercises, as a matter of balance, of equilibrium, without leaning to one side or the other, should permit the creator to deal directly with the creature and the creature directly with his creator and Lord. And this, I think one could talk a lot more about this, but the point is, the same thing as we've been looking at, that a certain faith that the Lord will come and be present to a devotee in the form that the devotee wants. So here, the creator, God, and the creature, the two of them in relationship to one another, that God will speak to the creature, the human, in the way that the human expects. And reading this passage from the Jesuit text, in light of this text from the Alvar, I think gives me a better understanding of Ignatius Loyola because I know Poigai Alvar. And therefore, in Christian prayer, there are many different ways one can think of God. So you have Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You can think of God as Father, as brother, as inner spirit. You can think of Jesus as a baby and a child, as a teacher, as a healer, as a friend and companion, even as a bridegroom, as a mother, as crucified, as risen. If one goes back over, let's say, 2,000 years of Christian teaching, there are so many different ways that Jesus Christ and God the Father have been talked about. How do they all fit together? How can they all be true? I think the point would be that seeing that in light of what the Alvar is saying makes it much more understandable. And for a Christian who wants to pray as a Christian, and knowing something of what the Alvar is saying actually helps them to be a better Christian. Whether it's true or not, I would say that the same thing might be true of you, that learning interreligiously can actually help you to be a better Sri Vaishnava. See if you think of that. But to conclude, 3 points. Study is a slow process, but very worthwhile if we are patient and keep on learning day by day. Going deep into a tradition, even to one verse of one text, as I did, can be illuminating and can give us a whole set of interconnections across the tradition, as I tried to show. Doing this opens up interreligious possibilities, as I have shown by my interest in Mutal Tiruvantati 44 in 1985, and now by the example of the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. So the interreligious is a way of being religious even in our own tradition. And I've learned this in part by reading Poigai Alvar. So I will stop with that and thank you for your attention. Thank you all.
Sir, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clooney. It was a very nice. You have traveled from Mutal Tiruvantati to Tiruvamudi to Bhagavad Gita and whatnot. I am very much happy. And I now request anybody, ask any questions? Don't take much time. Just put your questions only. Across.
Yeah, can I?
Yes, sure.
Please. Of course.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that. Yeah, as I have said that it was just, I once again heard what you have said more beautifully this time. And what I comprehended was how Lord tries to conform to the demands of his devotees, and how the archa forms become completely dependent on, say, for instance, the priests, the devotees, and so on and so forth. So as I'm just repeating what I have said in your previous presentation. So as I see, there is a mutual dependence of the devotee on the Lord and the Lord on the devotee. And there is a hermeneutic circle thus formed, the hermeneutics not in the linear form, but in the secular form, where the devotee picking up the form, of course, there is a definite archa form, and he starts meditating on that. But then the details of the archa form, the Lord adopts from the way how he's been conceived by his devotees. And to an extent, there is more and more dependence of the Lord on how the how his details have been worked out by the devotee, which is beautiful, and thus gets a hermeneutic circle, and the hermeneutics becomes more and more rich when the devotee and the Lord, in their mutual dependence, enriches the kavya. And as I have said the other day, like how the gods, I mean, there it has been said in our Puranas that there is a competition between lords, that how one can acquire the status of being kavya prasiddha. Like every god wants to be kavya prasiddha.
Mm,
So that he is being, that is how lords are totally dependent on human conception, and how humans deliver the details of lord and his form. But incidentally, when I was recently visiting the Ram Lalla form, I mean the temple, the recently raised temple, I was just wondering, I was telling my husband, well, do we have any literature on Ram Lalla? Is he kavya prasiddha? So that kavya prasiddhatva is very significant in the tradition, has been coming down since ages. And that's why literature is so very important. Like, you can conceive Lord Shiva's marriage because of Kumara Sambhava, so on and so forth. So there are
mhm,
instances of kavyas giving elaborations, the details are given by the devotees. See, there might be an archavatara form, but then the details are in the kavyas. And so this, how this enriches the whole of the hymn.
mm,
Yeah,
mm, mm, mm.
thank you for that.
Thank you. Just thank you, Srikala. Beautiful comments. I love the, putting it in terms of the hermeneutical circle, first of all, because it's not simply human interpretation, but according to this model, there's divine interaction with the human, and both are reinterpreting in terms of one another. And I think that is very beautiful. And then, as you say, the details matter. And that's perhaps the point, not simply some murti or some archa, but rather the specifics of it, even the material, gold, silver, clay, whatever, the colors, how large and small, all of that seems to be very much in the spirit of saying, well, as you make it, that will be for you perfect, and therefore the Lord will be there in that form. And I think, again, that resonates well with what we see in Catholic tradition as well. You go in a museum, you see so many images of the divine person or Jesus, one century or another century, one period, another period, and the resonance is there that these are ways people have imagined what God looks like. And that is so important, I think. Thank you.
Sudha madam, you will
Um,
please
I
unmute yourself.
don't have any questions. I only have some words of gratitude to Professor Clooney. In all my learning of Vedanta, I look upon only two people as the most important, and whom I never get tired of listening to repeatedly, of the same texts, of the same lectures. One is His Holiness Swami Paramarthananda Saraswati for his spiritual lectures, and Professor Francis Clooney for his academic inputs on the same text. Thank you very much, Professor Clooney.
Vasudha
And
madam.
therefore, he is my father. Yes.
Don't tell that to Swami Paramartananda. He may be annoyed that you said that. But thank you very much. You're most kind, maybe too kind, but thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. This is Sudha. First of all, I'm so fortunate to listen to this lecture today. I don't have any question as such because I still need some more time to assimilate the whole thing. But I'm just reading this question on behalf of Vaishnavi. So she has put a question in the chat. I'm just reading it, if I may. If each one of our imaginations and perceptions of Perumal are all valid, is that why the forms that our bhakti takes are so diverse and yet all valid? Just as it is not possible to fully define this Perumal, is that also why the nature of bhakti is also not possible to define?
I think that would be true. According to this model, that the diversity of the forms, the perceptions of Perumal according to different forms and faces, and obviously the different avatars and so on, that the diversity is all really the graciousness of the one Perumal, who comes in these different forms for different people. And therefore, as people often say, the many are disclosing the one, and the one is present in the many philosophically. That seems to be true theologically here as well. And the idea is that the Lord, again, in this gracious interrelationship with the human, comes in these different forms. And that's why bhakti, as you say, is not possible to, I mean, you could define it, I suppose, in terms of this service or heartfelt turning to the Lord. But then what it looks like would differ from case to case. And so an older man and a younger woman, somebody in Tamil Nadu, somebody in Gujarat, somebody in North America, it would look different. And maybe the language would be different, the resonance would be different, but that in some ways it's the similar bhakti. Now, this is perhaps easier for you to understand than for Vaishnavi to understand. In many Christian circles, there is a kind of an exclusion that if it is correct, it is one way of seeing what God is like and not other ways, and that God comes in a certain way. And that what I was trying in the essay that I put on the screen briefly is to try to say that we should not limit God by saying our devotion can only relate to God in one way and not many ways. And therefore, it is kind of an interreligious openness out of Poigai Alvar that I think we who are Christian, I who am Christian, can learn from. And that this is part of the nature of what the Alvar is talking about and all the related quotations are talking about. So thank you for that question, and thank you for reading it, Sudha.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now I request Dr. Jivanivas to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Parsardi. I mean, I must thank Father Clooney for the very thought-provoking talk on this Vaiyalvar's 44th Pasaram on Mutal Tiruvantati. You know, I mean, all these three, Mutal Alvar, second Alvar, and the third Alvar, all of them were trying to understand the form of God. So one says, Vayantagaliyai, Varkadaliniya. So in one form, and the other says, Anbe Tagaliyai, Aruvame Niyaga. And the third one, Vaiyalvar, talks about Tirukandane, Tirumeni Kandane, and that's how it goes on. So, but the essence of the Sloka 44, I mean the Pasaram 44 of Periya Tiruvantati, Mutal Tiruvantati, as explained by Father Clooney in connection with, and trying to connect it with Periyavachan Pillai's Vyakhyana, the Vyakhyana Chakravarti, who said, connected with Tiruvamari 369 and Bhagavad Gita 411, was all very, very interesting. I mean, as Srikala was mentioning, we'll have to sit down and listen to it more intently, because I was only trying to make notes, but couldn't do it fast. But once I repeatedly listen to the whole thing again, it will be very interesting. Incidentally, Father Clooney was my examiner for my PhD paper thesis, and I had a lot of interactions with him. He's not only an examiner, he's my friend. We have been together to the university. I have taken him to the university a number of times, where he delivered his lectures in the Christian department and in the Vaishnava department. I hope Father Clooney remembers that.
Oh, yes, very much. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. So that's how it is. And therefore, sir, it was a very scintillating talk. I'd like to go through it once again from the recording and then get back to you, sir. When you are next in India, we would like to meet you in person, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I hope I may be able to visit in November of this year. So maybe in November I will come down.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jagannivas. Thank you, Clooney.
Okay,
Okay, very nice.
thank you all.
Yeah,
Yes.
officially we
See
end
you.
the meeting, and the recording would be up in our YouTube channel soon. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Okay.
Thank you
you
very
all.
much.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks, sir.
Thank you all.